He killed me with paperwork, not with a pillow, not with poison, not even with a raised hand. My son, my only child, used ink, crisp and obedient as a soldier, to march across a page and declare that my life was over. He didn't wait for my heart to stop. He didn't wait for a funeral home or a pastor or the slow mercy of time. He just decided, on an ordinary day, that it would be easier if I were gone. Easier on his schedule, easier on his conscience, easier on his bank account. And then he told my grandchildren. He told Leo and Maya, my bright boy with the little scar over his eyebrow, my tender girl, who used to fall asleep with her fingers braided through my necklace, that Grandma wasn't here anymore. He gave them a story, small and neat like a folded napkin. She passed while traveling. It was sudden. It was sad. A bedtime whisper. A convenient tragedy. And if you've never had your name spoken in the past tense while you're still breathing, let me tell you what it feels like. It feels like someone has taken your face off the wall and put it in a box. It feels like sitting in a room full of people and realizing they've all agreed to look through you. It feels like drowning in daylight. My name is Marjorie Midge Caldwell, 74, born and raised in New York. The kind of woman who learned to walk fast and speak plainly because the city never waits for anyone's delicate feelings. My roots are in a narrow brownstone on a Brooklyn block where the trees lean over the sidewalk like gossiping aunties, where the stoops are worn smooth by decades of stories, where every floorboard has a memory it refuses to forget. That house isn't just an address, it's a spine. It held me upright when my husband died. It held my son when he was small and afraid of thunder. It held birthday candles and slammed doors and summer nights with the windows open and the sound of somebody's radio drifting through the street like a lazy river. I'm not a woman who drifts easily. I've always believed a person should be allowed to keep her own walls, but my son, Ivan, decided my walls were an asset. He started circling my life the way men circle a business deal. At first it was subtle, softened by the language of concern. He'd come by on Sundays in his pressed coat, his hair cut too sharp, his phone always lighting up like a restless eye. He'd kiss my cheek and stand in my hallway scanning the stairs, the banister, the corners of the ceiling, not looking at me, really, looking at the property, looking at what I owned. "You're doing okay up here?" he'd say, voice gentle, like he was checking on a neighbor's dog. "Those stairs are steep, Ma." I'd smile and pat his arm. "These stairs raised you," I'd say. "They're not going to take me out now." His wife, Brooke, came along sometimes. Brooke was polished in the way some women are polished when they've learned life as a performance. Her earrings always matched her mood. Her smile was always just a little too practiced. She'd walk through my living room with her hands clasped, nodding at my furniture as if she were touring a museum of an era she'd already decided was over. "It's just so much maintenance," she'd murmur, fingers skimming a windowsill, finding a speck of dust, like a prosecutor finding evidence. "And you're alone." Alone. That word is a weapon when people want you to surrender. I wasn't alone. I had Mrs. Rivera downstairs, who knocked on my door with plantains when she cooked too much. I had Mr. Kim on the corner, who saved me the good peaches when the delivery came. I had my church 2 avenues over. I had my girlfriends from the community garden who laughed loud enough to make the pigeons scatter. I had a whole life stitched into that block like embroidery. But Evan and Brooke spoke about my life as if it were a problem to solve. Closer to us. They'd say, safer, easier, better for the kids. And maybe you don't know this, but when people keep repeating the same words, they start to sound like truth, even when they're not. I'd lost my husband, Henry, for years before. Heart attack in the kitchen while he was slicing an onion, like his body couldn't wait for him to finish dinner. One moment he was making jokes about my singing, the next he was gone. And the room was full of sirens and strangers and the terrible, useless instruction to breathe. After Henry died, something in Evan changed. He became efficient. Not grief-stricken, not tender. Efficient, like my husband's death had flipped a switch in him that read, "Take control now." He offered to help with bills. He insisted on organizing my paperwork. He told me he could set up autopay because it's safer. He talked like a man who believes love is administration. I resisted in small ways. I insisted on writing my own checks. I insisted on keeping my own keys. I insisted on walking my own block. But then my hip betrayed me. That's how it happens sometimes. Your body gives the wrong person an opening. One fall. One night spent on the floor with the lamp knocked over. One neighbor banging on your door because they heard you cry out, tanned. Suddenly, the world looks at you like your independence is a reckless hobby. Evan arrived at the hospital the next morning with a bouquet of flowers, too expensive for a son who said he was stretched. Then he stood at the foot of my bed with that calm face he uses when he's already decided the outcome. "I found something," he said, and he made it sound like a gift. "A place where you can recover properly, just for a little while." A little while. Those words are always the hook. It wasn't a nursing home, he assured me. Oh no, it was a rehabilitation residence. A wellness campus. A restorative community. The brochure was glossy and bright, full of older people in matching polo shirts laughing at nothing. Gardens, yoga, smooth hallways, no stairs, no city noise, safety like a locked door. "You'll be pampered," Brooke added, leaning in like a nurse. "You won't have to worry about anything. And the kids can visit on weekends." The kids, Leo and Maya. That's how they got me. Because I love those children with a devotion that makes my chest ache. Leo has Henry's stubborn chin. Maya has my eyes. When she was little, she used to press her forehead to mine and whisper secrets like we were co-conspirators against the world. If someone had told me to cut off my own hand to keep those children safe, I'd have asked which hand. So when Evan said, "Ma, please," and let his voice crack just enough to sound human, something in me softened. He said he couldn't sleep worrying. He said he pictured me falling again. He said, "Just 6 months. Just until you're strong. Then you come right back." And then he slid another page across the hospital tray. "A power of attorney." He said it like it was a formality. Like it was a permission slip for a field trip. "Just so I can handle your mail and bills while you're away," he said. Just to keep everything smooth. And I was tired. Tired in a way only a woman who has fought her whole life understands. I was tired of arguing. Tired of being treated like a hazard. Tired of feeling my son's disappointment like a weight pressing down on my ribcage. I signed. I signed my name the way I'd signed school permission forms and mortgage papers, and the birthday card envelopes I sent to my grandchildren every year. I signed because I believed a son's love had limits but not cliffs. I didn't know I was handing him a shovel. The place they sent me, Hawthorne Haven, sat far enough away that the air tasted different. Not New York air with its metal edge and exhaust and roasted nuts. This air was soft, pine-scented, clean in a way that felt suspicious. Like a room that's been sanitized after something bad happened. My apartment there was. Pleasant, beige walls, beige curtains, beige carpet that swallowed sound. Outside my window, a small pond with a fountain that sprayed water in the same obedient pattern every hour. Like even nature had a schedule there. The staff smiled like mannequins. "Good morning, Ms. Caldwell. How are we feeling today?" Their cheerfulness didn't land on me. It slid off, because cheerfulness without knowing is just noise. At first, Evan called regularly. He kept up the mask. "How's the food? Are you making friends? Are the activities nice?" He talked fast, as if he had to get through the call like a chore. I told him the truth. I told him the food tasted like it was afraid of seasoning. I told him the other residents talked mostly about pain and pills. I told him I missed the sound of my street, the way my stoop felt under my feet, the smell of my own kitchen. He laughed in that tight way people laugh when they don't want to hear you. "Give it time," he'd say. "You'll adjust." Adjust. Another word that means surrender. Then the calls started dropping. The place had spotty service. The staff said brightly. I'd call Evan and get voicemail. I'd text and see not delivered. I'd try Brooke and hear nothing. When Evan did answer, he was always in a hurry. Always in a meeting. Always about to step into something important. "I'll call you back." He'd promise. He stopped calling back. Weeks went by, like that, quiet, thinning, disappearing. It felt like being slowly turned down on a volume knob. I asked to speak to my grandchildren. "They're busy," Evan said. "Soccer? Homework. You know kids." But I know my grandkids. And I know that if you put a phone in Maya's hand and tell her grandma's calling, she'll take it. She'll ask 100 questions. She'd tell me about her drawings, her dreams, her worries. She's a child who believes in connection. So when I kept not hearing from them, something inside me started to catch. Like a stitch pulled too tight. Then my money stopped. My pension from the city. My social security, my lifeline. I'd arranged my life carefully. I never had much, but I always had enough because I was disciplined. Henry used to tease me, "Midge, you could stretch $1 into a scarf." At Hawthorne Haven, they required a monthly payment for amenities. Nothing outrageous, but enough to matter. Evan was supposed to forward my funds. Give me access to my own money. The deposit didn't come. I went to the office and asked if a check had arrived. The woman behind the desk smiled and said, "Maybe it's delayed." Delayed. Another soft lie. I called Evan. He answered on the third try. sounding irritated like I'd interrupted his real life. "Oyama," he said, like he'd forgotten I exist. "It's on my desk. I've been slammed. I'll send it tomorrow." Tomorrow never came. I called again. Voicemail. I called. Brooke. Nothing. I started to feel something I hadn't felt since I was a little girl watching my father leave and not come back that night. That hollow panic. That sense that the ground under you is not ground at all, but a trapdoor. When you're older, panic doesn't look dramatic. It looks like silence at the edge of your bed, hands folded, trying not to let your face betray the fear blooming in your throat, because the worst thing you can do, when someone is trying to control you, is give them proof that you're unstable. That's what they want. They want you frantic. They want you emotional. They want a story they can tell about your confusion. So I steadied myself. And I called the one person on my block I trusted like family. Mr. Ellis. Graham Ellis was my neighbor for 30 years. He'd worked the postal service like Henry did, the two of them trading stories on the stoop like old soldiers. Graham was the kind of man who still carried peppermints in his pocket and remembered everyone's birthday without writing it down. He had eyes that noticed everything and a heart that didn't flinch. When he answered, his voice warmed immediately. "Midge. Well, I'll be. How's that fancy place treating you?" I swallowed the pride that rose in my throat. "Graham," I said softly, "I need you to do me a favor." I asked him to check my mail, to see what was coming to the house, to see if my bills were piling up. I felt ashamed even asking, like I was admitting my son had turned on me. But Graham didn't ask questions. He didn't say, "Why isn't Evan handling it?" He just said, "Of course, honey, give me an hour." That hour stretched long. When the phone rang again, his voice was different, lower, tighter. "Midge," he said, "you sitting down." My stomach dropped. "Just tell me." "There's a sign," he said, "on your lawn. Real estate, big glossy one." For a moment, my brain refused to accept the words. "A sign? A for sale sign," he said. "And the mailbox it's empty. There's a forwarding order. Your mail's being sent to a P.O. box." My hands went numb. "What?" "I went down to the post office," he continued, and I could hear him breathing hard. "I asked around. Discreet. That P.O. box. Evan opened it 2 months ago. 2 months. 2 months of him quietly siphoning my life away." I felt my throat tighten so sharply I could barely speak. "Graham," I whispered. "What else?" Silence on the line. The kind of silence that means someone is choosing the least painful way to stab you. Then he said, "I overheard Brooke outside." I closed my eyes. "Say it." There was a woman with her looked like an agent. They were on speakerphone. His voice roughened. "Brooke said. She said the kids have had a hard time adjusting. Since Evan's mother passed, the world went white around the edges. Past my son had killed me in conversation. My son had tucked my death into their family narrative like it was a practical detail. I didn't cry then. I didn't scream. I just sat very still and felt something ancient rise up in me. Something that doesn't belong to old age or youth but to survival. It was the part of me that carried Henry through sickness. The part that worked double shifts when Evan was little. The part that learned early that love does not protect you from betrayal. I hung up the phone and stared out at the pond where the fountain kept spraying its obedient water. I realized I wasn't in a wellness retreat. I was in a holding pen. They hadn't sent me here to heal. They'd sent me here to disappear, to be out of sight while paperwork did its quiet work. And then they'd erase me completely. I spent one full day in a kind of frozen grief. Not the grief of losing someone you love, but the grief of being turned into someone who doesn't exist. I walked the manicured paths and watched other residents shuffle along. Eyes down, each of us contained by cheerful landscaping and locked doors, and staff who called it care. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed and thought about Maya and Leo. I pictured Maya's face when she'd be told that Grandma was gone. I pictured Leo pretending he didn't care because boys are taught to swallow sadness like pills. I pictured them growing up, with my name filed under loss, never knowing I was alive somewhere, waiting, reaching, being held away from them, and something in me snapped clean. Not in a broken way. In a sharpened way. I sat up in the dark and said out loud, "No." A simple word, but it filled the room like a bell. They thought my body was old enough to be managed. They thought my silence meant surrender. They thought the stories they told about me would become true. If they told them often enough. They forgot what kind of woman raised Evan. They forgot I know my own mind. The next morning, I walked into the administrative office at Hawthorne Haven like I belonged there. I smiled politely. I asked to use a phone line that had better reception for a family call. The woman at the desk beamed and led me to a small room, as if doing me a kindness. I called Graham. When he answered, I didn't tremble this time. My voice was low and steady, like a knife laid flat on a table. "I'm coming home," I said. His exhale sounded like relief and fury braided together. "I was hoping you'd say that." "Listen carefully," I said. "No one can know. Not Evan, not Brooke, not anyone." "You got it," he said. "Tell me what you need." And this is what I needed. A way out that didn't leave a trail. Graham booked me a one-way ticket under his name. A friend traveling, using his own card. He arranged a car service from the facility to the airport. He told me what time to be outside, which door. He told me to pack light. I packed one suitcase. Not my photos. Not my keepsakes. Not the quilts Henry's mother stitched. I left those behind because the moment you try to carry your whole life, you move too slow. I packed the essentials. My ID, my birth certificate, my marriage license, my medical papers, a small stack of photographs of Leo and Maya, and the one thing I couldn't bear to leave, Henry's ring, which I still kept in a velvet box by my bed. Then I walked out of Hawthorne Haven like I was going to lunch. I told the receptionist I was visiting a cousin for the weekend. She smiled brightly and said, "Have a wonderful trip, Ms. Caldwell," as if she'd just handed me a brochure for happiness at the airport. The noise hit me like life. Announcements, rolling suitcases, people rushing like the world mattered. I breathed it in like medicine. When the plane lifted, I looked down and watched the neat, manicured world shrink beneath me until it looked like a toy. I felt my chest ache with something close to gratitude. I was not dead, and I was not done. Graham met me at LaGuardia wearing a hat pulled low, like we were in a movie about criminals. He hugged me hard enough to remind my body it still existed. "Welcome back, Midge," he said, voice thick. He drove me into Brooklyn under the cover of evening. The skyline cutting against the dusk like teeth. The city smelled like street food and rain on pavement. I wanted to cry from the familiarity of it. We turned onto my block, and there it was, my house. Lit from inside, a strange car parked out front. Graham slowed the car and nodded toward a cluster of people moving through my front doorway. "They're showing it," he murmured. "Open house." The rage that rose in me was so clean it steadied my hands. We didn't stop. We drove past. Like ghosts, Graham brought me into his own home next door and tucked me into the spare room. From that window, I could see into my living room through the curtains when the lights were on. My own furniture looked unfamiliar with strangers standing near it, like an old friend seen through glass. For the next week, I became invisible in my own neighborhood. I watched as couples walked through my rooms. Guided by a real estate agent with white teeth and a smooth voice, I watched them run their hands along the banister Henry once polished. I watched them peer into the kitchen where I'd made spaghetti on nights Evan brought home drawings from school. I watched them step into my garden, look at my roses like they were evaluating stock. "Great bones," I heard one man say, faint through the open window. "Bones. That's what people call the life you built." When they want to strip it down, Graham did what he does best. He watched, he listened. He played dumb and friendly, the way people underestimate older men. He chatted with the agent on the sidewalk, asked questions like a curious neighbor. That's how we learned. Evan was selling it as an estate sale. My estate. As if my death was a fact that could be notarized. That's how we learned the closing date. Friday. 10 a.m. Manhattan. A law office with glass walls and a receptionist who would offer them water while they signed my life away. When Graham told me the details, I sat on the edge of his bed and let the plan form in my mind like a storm cloud gathering. I could have called Evan right then. I could have screamed into voicemail. I could have threatened. I could have begged, but I know my son. He would twist it. He would call me unstable. He would tell people I was confused. He would claim I'd been wandering. He would try to have me declared incompetent and locked away properly this time. He would turn my resurrection into another story where he was the hero who saved his mother. No. If Evan wanted a public stage, then a public stage is what he'd get. But I needed help. Not from family. Not from friends who would try to mediate and soften it into something polite. I needed someone who understood the law the way a surgeon understands anatomy. Graham knew a lawyer. Not some downtown shark. Someone who dealt with elder exploitation. Someone who'd seen this kind of betrayal and didn't flinch. Her name was Celeste Harmon. Her office was in a brownstone in Harlem. Quiet and elegant. Books lining the walls like witnesses. She was in her 50s, hair silver-streaked, eyes sharp. She shook my hand and looked at me as if she could already see through my son's lies. I told her everything, the pressure, the wellness pitch, the power of attorney, the isolation, the missing money, the lie about my death. When I finished, she sat still for a moment, then spoke with a calm that made my skin prickle. "You're alive," she said simply. "Yes, and you never consented to the sale of your home." "No, you signed a durable power of attorney," she said, and her tone acknowledged the complication. "But your son had a fiduciary duty. He was obligated to act in your best interest." I felt the fear creep in. Does that mean he can still? She lifted a hand. "It means he overplayed his hand." Her eyes hardened. "He isolated you. He controlled your funds. He fabricated your death to justify transferring assets. That's not just unethical. That's fraud. That's exploitation." The validation hit me like air after being underwater too long. Celeste opened a folder and slid a document toward me. "We revoke the power of attorney," she said. Immediately, legally, cleanly. My fingers hovered over the pen. The last time I signed something, it nearly buried me. This time, my hand didn't shake. I signed, and it felt like cutting a chain. Then she said, "We revise your will." That part hurt in a way I didn't expect. It's one thing to be angry at your child. It's another thing to accept that the child you raised is not the person you thought you raised. But I thought of Maya and Leo. I thought of their faces at my imaginary funeral, their little hearts carrying a lie like a stone. So I told Celeste exactly what I wanted. Evan would not inherit a dime from me. Not the house. Not the savings. Not the history. Everything would go into a trust for my grandchildren, protected like a vault. Money for school, for healthcare, for their future, with strict rules that kept Evan and Brooke's hands off it. A trustee who wasn't family, someone steady, loyal, honest. Graham. When Celeste asked if I was sure, I didn't answer with anger. I answered with clarity. "I'm sure," I said. "My son already took his inheritance. He took it in advance." We signed the papers. Celeste notarized them. She filed what needed to be filed. Her office moved like a machine built for justice. Then she leaned forward, and her voice dropped into something almost intimate. "Here's what your son expects," she said. "He expects you to fight in private, where he can control the narrative. He expects you to plead, where he can call you emotional. He expects you to write a letter, so he can erase it." I swallowed. "So what do we do?" Celeste smiled, not warm, not cruel. Strategic. "We let him proceed," she said. "We let him walk into that closing with his confidence. And then we walk in with the truth." The idea of it made my heart pound. Not from fear, from something like exhilaration. A feeling I hadn't touched since I was young and bold, and didn't know life could be this sharp. "You mean, we surprise him," I said. "We don't surprise him," she corrected gently. "We correct him, in front of witnesses." For 3 days, I stayed hidden in Graham's house, like a woman in exile watching her own country being sold. I watched Evan and Brooke come by the property once, laughing as they climbed my steps. Brooke held a little folder. Evan wore that calm, satisfied face. They looked like people celebrating a win. I wanted to run out and slap the smugness off my son's mouth. But Celeste told me, "Not yet." So I waited. The night before the closing, I sat in the dark by Graham's window and looked at the shape of my house against the streetlights. Doubt crawled in, quiet and poisonous. What if Evan had already filed something? What if he claimed I wasn't competent? What if? Celeste called me around midnight. "I know you're awake," she said. I laughed once. Bitter. "Is it that obvious?" "You're doing the hardest part," she said. "You're holding your ground." I stared at my house. I keep thinking, he's my son. There was a pause. Then her voice softened. "He used that. Your love. Your instinct to protect him. But tomorrow, your instinct has to be to protect yourself. And those children." My throat tightened. "They told them I'm dead." "I know," she said, and there was a quiet fury under her calm. "Tomorrow, you'll become undeniable. That's the only antidote to a lie that big." When we hung up, I went to bed and slept for 2 hours. Then woke before dawn with my heart beating like it had somewhere to go. Friday arrived, crisp and bright. The kind of day New York wears like a sharp suit. Celeste picked me up in a car, and when I stepped out onto the sidewalk, I wore a navy coat and a pearl pin Henry once gave me, not because I wanted to look fancy, because I wanted to look like myself, solid, dignified, unbroken. I wasn't going to walk into that room as a victim. I was going to walk in as the owner. The law office downtown looked like money, glass, marble, silence. The receptionist smiled at Celeste like she recognized power. We waited in a small lounge with a view of the city. The skyline stretched out like a dare. Celeste checked her phone once, then twice, then nodded. There in the room, she said. My pulse climbed. I thought of Maya and Leo. I thought of the bedtime story they'd been fed. I thought of my name being spoken as if it belonged to the past. We walked down a corridor lined with conference rooms. I saw people in suits talking about deals like lives were numbers. Then we reached the door. Through the glass, I saw them, Evan, at the table, relaxed. Brooke beside him, her hand resting on his arm in that possessive way, like she owned the outcome. Across from them, a couple I didn't know, the buyers leaning forward, smiling, papers spread out like a feast. The closing attorney slid a document toward Evan. I saw Evan pick up a pen. Even from behind glass, I could read the moment. He was about to sign as if I were already dust. Celeste placed a hand lightly on my arm. Now, she murmured. She opened the door. The sound of it soft, controlled still cut through the room. Like a blade, every head turned. Time slowed in that strange way it does when truth enters a room that has been built on lies. Evan's eyes landed on me, and I watched his face change. His smile froze first, like a mask cracking. Then the color drained out of him, leaving something pale and stunned. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Brooke's hand flew to her throat. Her eyes widened as if she'd seen a ghost. But I wasn't a ghost. I walked forward. Steady, my shoes making small, confident sounds on the carpet. I didn't rush. I didn't tremble. I stopped at the end of the table and looked at my son like he was a stranger who'd broken into my home. Celeste spoke first. Her voice smooth and clear. Good morning, she said. I'm Celeste Harmon. I represent Ms. Marjorie Caldwell, the living owner of this property. The buyers blinked, confused. The closing attorney's eyes sharpened. She glanced at the papers, then back at me, as if recalculating reality. Evan stared, as if his brain was trying to reject what it couldn't afford to accept. I leaned slightly forward, just enough to make him have to meet my eyes. My son, I said quietly, and the room went even more silent. You've been telling stories. Brooke made a strangled sound, half sob, half protest. Evan's pen hovered above the paper like it didn't know where to land. The buyer's lawyer stood abruptly. Excuse me, he said, voice rising. We were informed this was an estate sale. We were shown documentation. Celeste slid a folder across the table with a calm that felt like ice. The power of attorney was revoked. She said, here is the revocation. Here is the identification of my client. Here is a formal notice that this sale is unauthorized. Any signatures under the pretense of her death constitute fraud. The buyer's lawyer flipped through pages, his face tightening with each line. The closing attorney pushed her chair back slightly, eyes narrowing at Evan. Mr. Caldwell, she said slowly, were you aware your mother is alive? Evan's throat worked. He looked at me, and for the first time in months, he looked afraid. Brooke started crying, big dramatic tears, as if she were the victim of the consequences she'd helped create. This is a misunderstanding, she gasped. A misunderstanding, I repeated softly. The words tasted like rust. I looked at Evan. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. You told my grandchildren I'm dead. I said. That wasn't a misunderstanding. Evan's eyes flicked toward the buyers, the lawyers, the witnesses. His world was collapsing in public. I watched him search for a way to spin it, to salvage the narrative. Celeste didn't give him room. This meeting is over, she said crisply, and you may want to consult criminal counsel. The room erupted after that, voices overlapping, outrage blooming, lawyers switching into crisis mode. The buyers were furious. The closing attorney was furious. The buyer's lawyer demanded answers. Brooke sobbed louder. Evan sat frozen like a man watching his own life fall off a ledge. I didn't stay to listen to the chaos. My presence had done what it needed to do. I turned and walked out with Celeste at my side, leaving the sound of their collapse behind me like a door-shutting dot in the elevator. As we descended, my knees finally softened, not from regret, from release. I pressed a hand to the cool wall and breathed. Celeste glanced at me. You did well, she said. I laughed once, small, amazed. I can't believe he tried it. She didn't laugh. I can, she said quietly. And that's why you're going to be protected now. The weeks after that were legal fire. Evan faced consequences he'd never imagined because he'd never imagined his mother would return to the story. There were threats of lawsuits from the buyers. Investigations. Documents demanded. Money traced. Celeste moved through it all like she was built for this work, shielding me from the worst of it. Keeping me steady, Evan returned the deed to my house. He returned the money he'd taken. He signed papers with hands that shook. His confidence turned to ash. He tried once to call me. To explain, I didn't answer. Because I didn't recognize the voice on the voicemail as my son's. It sounded like a man pleading for his own comfort. And I am done providing comfort to people who harm me. The hardest part wasn't the house. The house came back like a limb reattached. The hardest part was my grandchildren, because how do you tell children that the adults they trust lied about something that's sacred? How do you stitch that tear without making them bleed? I went to Evan's house one afternoon when I knew the kids would be home. Celeste advised against it. Graham worried. But I couldn't stay away. My heart had been calling those children like a bell. I stood on the suburban porch, the grass cut too perfectly, the air too quiet, and when Brooke opened the door, her face turned white. Maya, I called softly, before Brooke could speak. Leo. For a moment, there was only silence. Then Maya appeared at the top of the stairs. Her face small and stunned, like a child seeing a miracle and not sure if miracles are allowed. She whispered, "Grandma." And I felt something inside me break and heal at the same time. "Yes," I said, voice trembling now. Because trembling in front of your grandchildren is not weakness, it's honesty. "It's me." Maya ran down the stairs and slammed into me with all the force of her little body. Arms wrapping around my waist like she was afraid I'd vanish again. She buried her face in my coat, and cried the kind of cry children cry when something finally makes sense again. Leo stood a little behind. Stiff, older than 12 should look. His eyes were wet, but he blinked hard like he hated tears. He walked forward slowly, and said, very quietly, "They said you were gone." I knelt in front of him, hands on his shoulders, and looked straight into his eyes. "I'm here," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." He swallowed. Why would they say that? There it was, the question that would shape him if it wasn't answered carefully. I didn't lie. I didn't tell him fairy tales. But I didn't poison him either. I said, "Sometimes grown-ups get scared of losing control. Sometimes they make terrible choices. But I am here. And you didn't do anything wrong." Leo nodded once, like he stored that sentence somewhere safe. Brooke stood behind me in the doorway, crying silently now, but her tears did not move me. Evan was not home. I could feel his absence like a shadow. Maybe he was hiding. Maybe he was ashamed. Maybe he was angry that his story had been undone. Good. Let him sit with it. I took my grandchildren out for ice cream. The three of us in a booth, sticky and laughing and shaky all at once. Maya told me she'd had dreams where I was calling her. Leo told me he'd kept one of my old birthday cards in his drawer just because. I smiled and pretended my heart wasn't splintering. Healing doesn't happen in one afternoon, but it begins the moment the truth is spoken out loud. When I finally walked back into my brownstone, it smelled like dust and lemon cleaner, and the ghost of someone else's intentions. Evan had tried to scrub my presence out of its staging, emptying drawers, making it look like a house already detached from its owner. But the house recognized me. The floorboards creaked under my feet like a greeting. The banister fit my hand. The kitchen light fell on the counter exactly the way it always had, warm and familiar. I stood in my living room and let the air settle around me. I wasn't just returning to a building. I was returning to myself. Graham came over that night with a pot of soup and sat with me at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd once signed my life away. He didn't say "I told you so." He didn't ask questions that would open wounds. He just sat there like a steady pillar. And that's what real love looks like at our age. Celeste visited once more to finalize paperwork, to confirm the trust, to make sure my defenses were built higher than Evan's greed could climb. When she left, she paused at my doorway. "You did something important," she said. I frowned. "I just got my house back." She shook her head. "You showed up," she said. "A lot of people don't. They're taught not to make trouble. They're taught to disappear politely." I leaned on the doorframe and watched her walk away. That night, I slept in my own bed, in my own room, with Henry's ring in my hand. I woke just before sunrise and lay there listening to the city waking up, the far-off siren, the garbage truck, someone laughing on the sidewalk, the music of my life. And I thought about the strangest part of all this. It wasn't that Evan betrayed me. Children betrayed parents in small ways all the time. They forget to call, they get selfish. They drift. The strangest part was that he tried to erase me and thought the world would accept it. Because that's what people do with older women. They speak of us as if we are already leaving. They use us as cautionary tales. They call us sweet when they mean silent. They call us confused when they mean inconvenient. They call our independence dangerous when it threatens their access. They don't realize some of us are still storms. I won't pretend my heart doesn't hurt. It does. There are nights when I remember Evan at 5 years old, curled beside me on the couch, whispering, "Don't let anything happen to me." There are nights when I wonder when my son stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a problem. There are mornings when grief hits like cold water because the child I raised is, in a way, gone. But grief doesn't get to be the last word, not after what I learned. I learned that dignity is not given, it is taken back. I learned that love without boundaries becomes a doorway for predators even when the predator shares your blood. I learned that sometimes the only way to defeat a lie is to walk into the room and stand there, alive, breathing, undeniable. Now, when I visit the nursing home to see friends who are still trapped there by families who call it care, I sit with them and I tell them, don't sign anything you don't understand. I tell them, keep your documents. I tell them, call someone who isn't invested in your disappearance. I tell them, you're not crazy, you're not dramatic. You are alive. I say it like a prayer. Because maybe that's what this became for me, a kind of resurrection, not just of my life, but of my voice. And when my grandchildren come to visit my house now, Maya runs up the steps like she owns the air. Leo sits at my table and eats my cooking like he's starving for something only a grandmother can give. They look at the pictures on my walls and ask questions about Henry. They listen to my stories like they matter. Because they do. Evan is a shadow at the edge of my life now. A name I don't speak much. A lesson I had to learn too late. I don't hate him every day. Hate takes energy. Some days, I feel only a quiet, weary clarity. A mother can love the child she raised and still refuse the man he became. Sometimes, late at night, I sit on my stoop with a blanket over my knees and watch the streetlights shimmer on the leaves. I listen to the city breathe. I hold Henry's ring between my fingers and think about how close I came to being erased. How close I came to becoming a story told about me instead of a life lived by me. And I think about that moment in the conference room, the pen in my son's hand, the paper waiting for my death to be finalized. The room full of people ready to accept the lie because it was convenient. Then I remember the look on his face when he saw me, not joy, not relief, shock, ruin. The truth has a sound when it enters a room that isn't ready for it. It's not loud, it's not dramatic. It's the sudden hush when everyone realizes reality has arrived. That hush is something I carry now. A reminder. If someone tries to bury you while you're still breathing, the most powerful thing you can do is stand up and walk back into your own life. Not screaming, not begging, just arriving. Solid as a door, certain as a heartbeat. Because the thing about graves is this: they're meant for the dead. And I am not dead. I am not a bedtime whisper. I am not a convenient tragedy. I am Marjorie Caldwell. And I'm sitting on my stoop in Brooklyn with the night air on my face, listening to my city. And if you listen closely, close enough to hear beneath the traffic and the wind, you can hear it too. The quiet, stubborn music of a woman who refused to disappear.